I'll give the floor to Ms. Joyce Msuya.
Thank you, Excellency President Bio, for this opportunity to speak on the critical issue of conflict-induced hunger. The evidence from the latest Hunger Hotspots report from the Global Network Against Food Crisis is clear. The world's most extreme food crisis, including the famines in parts of the Gaza Strip and Sudan, are driven primarily by armed conflict and violence. In South Sudan, the risk of famine persists in some counties affected by localized violence. The more intense the violence, the worse the food insecurity. Attacks harming civilians and civilian infrastructure leave fields abandoned, disrupt food supply chains, drive up prices, and destroy livelihoods. In Yemen, where 17 million people are going hungry and another 1 million are forecast to, damage to infrastructure has impeded imports. Ongoing conflict is displacing people and exacerbating economic decline, while extreme humanitarian access constraints and insecurity limit aid delivery in critical parts of the country. In Syria, agricultural production has been severely affected by damaged infrastructure, restricted access to farmland due to explosive ordnance, and high levels of displacement. Hunger is exposing people to greater risks of sexual exploitation and abuse and forced displacement as people struggle simply to feed themselves. Women are especially impacted, often going without to prioritize their families. In armed conflicts, international humanitarian law is clear. Civilians and civilian objects must be protected. The use of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited. So is attacking, destroying, removing, or rendering useless objects indispensable to civilian survival. Resolution 2417, adopted in 2018, reinforces these obligations. And in situations of violence in which the rules of war don't apply, international human rights law and minimum humanitarian standards play an equally vital role in preventing and addressing hunger. Humanitarian action is also essential to prevent and address hunger in conflict. When humanitarian access is denied, hunger and malnutrition rise, often with devastating consequences for civilians. Conflict parties must allow the rapid and unimpeded passage of impartial humanitarian relief and ensure humanitarians have the freedom of movement needed to carry out their work. Resolution 2417, as well as Resolution 2730, adopted last year, reiterate these duties. 1 month into the ceasefire in Gaza, the UN and our partners are seizing every opening to save lives. Millions of meals have been provided, nutrition sites have reopened, and some medical services have resumed, among other progress. But access is still restricted by limits at border crossings, delays to aid convoys, and bureaucratic impediments that slow the entry of vital supplies and, in some cases, staff. In Sudan, conflict has shattered food systems and displaced millions. According to the latest IPC analysis, more than 21 million people are facing high levels of acute food insecurity, the largest such crisis in the world. Yet many areas remain inaccessible to humanitarians. People trapped between front lines are cut off from assistance and enduring extreme hunger. The UN, including OCHA, works relentlessly to secure humanitarian access, We negotiate with parties to conflict, operate notification systems to inform armed actors about humanitarian movements, and coordinate responders on the ground. But these tools can only work if parties are committed to facilitate access and aid operations. The record number of attacks harming aid workers over the past 2 years and the knock-on effect on communities' access to relief is appalling. I call on states to condemn these attacks and push for consistent, credible investigations in every context. Reducing bureaucratic hurdles also facilitates access, simplifying entry procedures for humanitarian staff, speeding up permits for relief supplies, and enabling safe movement. Clearance of unexploded ordnance is another practical enabler, allowing aid to reach people safely and helping farmers return to their land. And humanitarian funding remains essential to sustain operations. Finally, without political will, even the best coordination, negotiation, and funding will fall short. Preventing and ending hunger is not simply a logistical or financial challenge. It demands sustained political engagement. I want to propose 4 areas of action for this Council and UN member states. First, use your leverage to address hunger and conflict. This means sustained political dialogue and diplomatic engagement and using tools at your disposal to influence parties. As part of that, making compliance with international law a condition for arms exports is essential. Second, adopt strong policies and practices to protect civilians. Alongside implementing their legal obligations, we encourage member states to join commitments such as the political declaration on strengthening the protection of civilians from the humanitarian consequences arising from the use of explosive weapons in populated areas and turning those commitments into real action. Third, facilitate humanitarian action by simplifying bureaucratic procedures and ensuring humanitarians can engage all parties. Implement Security Council Resolution 2730 on the protection of aid workers, including the practical steps outlined by the Secretary General. Fourth, strengthen accountability. Demand and support investigations. Adopt legislation to prosecute war crimes, enhance interstate cooperation, and where competent national authorities are unable or unwilling to act, support international jurisdictions. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Msuya for her briefing. And I'll give the floor to Mr. Maximo Torero.